Welcome back and congratulations! You now have completed 2/3 of Module 2. As we begin Lesson 3 and go into Topic 1, I want to take a few minutes here introducing some very sensitive and more mature content. It has to do with a crucial subject either you or someone you may know might be dealing with, the hashtag #MeToo. Let me just say, sexual violation, assault, and harassment is a unique form of offense, abuse, and crime that demands attention in this area of forgiveness and the power it provides both to the victim and to the violator. I want you to know that truth has a voice, and I am forever dedicated to helping you find yours. On a personal note, I want to share that 3 out of my 5 daughters have now identified themselves with the hashtag #MeToo and have suffered from the traumatic consequences of being violated and assaulted. Even though I have personally dealt with the sexual violation I suffered as a teen, it wasn't until recently that I opened up to my own daughters about what happened to me. To my shame, I waited far too long to be transparent and vulnerable. Remember, being vulnerable means living from the inside out. So my emphasis here is not only hashtag #MeToo, but more importantly, hashtag #MeToo, now what? Because it is an absolute vital thing that we find our voice, use our voice, and communicate through our voice a message of hope and truth that is liberating, empowering, and victorious to the masses. The statistics attached to hashtag #MeToo are staggering and should at the very least take our breath away. According to the 2018 Pew Research Center, there have been 19 million tweets of hashtag #MeToo. And the economic cost? No one knows. Studies of the financial cost of sexual harassment are few and far between. And who can even begin to qualify what those costs are? They can look at the loss of businesses and the price that it's put on local businesses or corporations. How about stocks and the market, or sponsorships, or the legal cost? Yet, in all of these areas that I just mentioned, not even one have I been able to find who that has analyzed and has any statistics on the physical, mental, emotional health cost. Perhaps this is because so little is done by way of judges demanding retribution from perpetrators to pay for the cost of all mental health care needs for the victim. Not to mention the adequate treatment perpetrators and violators are not afforded either. So no one really even knows. In our personal situation, the added tragedy is how the justice processed the violator and how he processed our daughters who were violated. They had sequestered them. There were 2 men. They were not qualified to deal with little girls in this area. They asked questions that caused them to cocoon and recoil into almost infantile behavior as 5 and 7-year-olds. Then they followed an incredible improper way of handling the age appropriateness and not having a female present. So in their interviewing process, the court could have had far more important information, and to the degree that the perpetrator, the violator, should have been charged with and sentenced to. But instead, they took what they got from an incredibly inappropriate way of getting the information, and it left our children, our 2 girls, traumatized for years and years to come. Just as unconscionable was the court's lack of consideration in obligating their perpetrator to make any kind of retribution and pay for the mental and emotional health care my daughters desperately needed. In a more recent assault, while in a home with at least 30 other family members, My then 15-year-old daughter, while sleeping in a living room in an open area, was awakened in the middle of the night and then assaulted. The report was made immediately, and even in spite of pressure and the pleas not to do so from family members who found out, we not only made the report, but we followed up with the interview. Yet the courts completely disregarded their obligation to due process. While the almost 70-year-old man rallied his family members, convincing them that he did nothing, our daughter was completely off a radar. And so the Child Advocacy Center, the investigator, the police officer did nothing by way of completing their investigation and offering my daughter due process. After repeated calls regarding the status of the investigation, I was informed that their department was understaffed and they had more important cases in their pile of reports. So you can see I have firsthand reason to be as passionate and intentional about introducing #MeToo Now What, a legislative and clerical awareness and intentional movement mandating protection, preparedness, and provisions for all those who are affected by the #MeToo and sexual assault. We hear a lot about see something, say something, don't we? But it is crucial in what, how, and to whom we say something. It needs to be handled with an even greater level of prudence, discernment, and protection for everyone. So right now, I want to speak to 3 separate situations for the purpose of bringing clarity, compassion, and a clear conscience to those paralyzed by shame, guilt, and fear. I'm going to talk about 2 different kinds of victims, and then the third could be a victim and a violator, or just a violator. The first one is an unsuspecting victim, such as infants, little children, those who have been entrapped, lured, and preyed upon, those who have suddenly been attacked without any warning whatsoever. The second are those who are suspecting or suspicious victims. They've been living risky lifestyles, those who remain in a complicated, compromising relationship, those that got into something that wasn't meant to go that far. And then the perpetrator, who is guilty of either being violated and or being a violator. In the first situation, in the first group of people, of being an unsuspecting innocent victim, this is clear, cut, and dry. God gives us protection, an established advocate. Not only is Christ himself our advocate, but so is the court of law. If you, as an infant, child, adolescent, or a parent and caregiver of one, or as an adult who has been sexually molested, assaulted, or violated in any way, you must call the police and report it. That is God's mandate for justice, protection, and retribution. As it pertains to extending forgiveness, this too is clear, cut, and dry. Forgiveness is not optional. It's a command. But here's the beautiful secret. Unbelievers and undiscipled believers don't understand. Forgiveness is not primarily about your offender or your violator. It is first and foremost about you and your personal relationship and walk with God himself, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. Through the power of forgiveness, you are a super spiritually grace endowed person. There is a grace giving you freedom and a position over your offender that you can't obtain in any other way. Grace is the power and the desire to walk out God's will with joyfulness. You aren't afforded this grace in spite of what has happened to you. Because of what has happened to you, you are given this grace. Martin Luther said this: sin has but 2 places where it may be. Either it may be with you, so that it lies upon your neck, or upon Christ, the Lamb of God. If now it lies upon your neck, you are lost. If, however, it lies upon Christ, You are free and you will be saved. That's a great quote. This is the power of grace and forgiveness, regardless of whether we are a victim or a violator. For now, let's stay on point with those who are the victim. Forgiving such an offender does not excuse, minimize, or in any way give permission for you to be victimized all over again by your violator. It is a super spiritual shift and transfer of ownership as to who is going to carry the burden, accountability, and consequences for this crime and sin committed against you. Here's another side note I'd like to share. Choosing to extend forgiveness doesn't have to begin with you feeling like you want to forgive in your heart. Most often, like in my case, it originated in my will. I didn't feel he deserved it, wanted it, or even cared. I extended forgiveness because I wanted to be obedient. I wanted to have a love relationship with God, a continued open heart towards God. And I knew that it was all about he and I first and foremost. I had no idea what all the blessings of doing so by forgiving were going to be. God and Jesus became my advocate. They became my defender, the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the executor of the sentence. The Spirit of Christ became my protector, my comforter, my peace, my safe place, a very present help in the midst of my trouble, sorrow, and loss. So, when we choose to forgive, we are giving up our right to own our violator's sin. When we choose not to forgive, we are taking ownership of our violator's actions and sin against us. Does that make sense? We attach ourselves to our violator, his sin, and all the effects of darkness, despair, and death of that sin. We give that violator a place in our heart and mind with a power over our thoughts and emotions. We give them a presence to continually accompany us into every future opportunity, environment, conversation, and relationship in our lives. No offender, no violator deserves that kind of power of influence over you. Yet, because we choose to not forgive, that's exactly what we are inviting into our personhood. Forgiveness transfers ownership, accountability, and justice to God himself. He says in Romans 12:9, "Beloved, never avenge yourself, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine. I will repay,' says the Lord." It is done through the power of the blood of Christ. And you can look more on that in the appendix in the back of this book, because there is an important emphasis and what the blood of Christ actually means. It's so under talked about now, and yet I want to bring light to it, and I want it to empower you to understand the whole purpose of why Jesus shed his blood for your sin and mine. As a victim, choosing to forgive removes the stain, stigma, shame, guilt, fear, and any lingering condemnation the victim may have on us. God has already taken that sin that's been committed against you and placed it on Jesus Christ while he was on the cross. Forgiveness is acknowledging that Jesus bore that sin already. It's not yours to bear or carry it any further. You must transfer it all onto Christ. Forgiveness does not let your offender or violator off the hook. It actually places them on God's hook. Unforgiveness takes on a spirit of pride that assumes God's position, power, and ultimate purpose. And let's face it, that's a very dangerous, destructive spirit to align with. Reconciliation and restoration, however, is another matter. We are called to, as much as lies within us, live peaceably with all men. I'd like to make another bold and clear biblical principle here, statement. Being reconciled with a sexual predator is not an option for a minor. Federal and state laws protect victims from any future contact with a predator or accessibility to not only you as the victim, but also to any other minor children. The National Sexual Offenders List is a public record for any and all potential social, professional, faith-based communities to avail themselves to in order to guard and protect minor children. Subjecting minors and unsuspecting victims to the presence and influence of a sexual predator is damaging and cruel neglect, whether it is intentional or not. We have a God-given right to be protected from other and further trauma and victimization. As a minor or a parent caregiver of one, it is our responsibility to adhere to, honor, and report any and all kinds of violations to this protection, regardless of the relationship to the predator. All right, let's go into number two. Number two kind of group of people are those who are suspecting or suspicious victims. They have been living at-risk lifestyles, complicated, compromising relationships. They've been in something that wasn't meant to go that far. There is something that I need to say, because this is where it gets muddy and messy, and it's where and with whom the line needs to be established, and how we need to draw the line as to who's responsible for what. So before I'm taken out of context, let me just say this out loud, very clear. There is no excuse, justification, defense for someone who is abusing, assaulting, or violating another person emotionally, psychologically, verbally, sexually, physically, period, exclamation point. With that being clearly said, what I'm going to say now is I'm going to lay out a category where I believe far too many of those who identify themselves with the hashtag #MeToo fall into. To quote a report published by the National Institute of Justice, it says, sexual violence may occur in any type of relationship, but most perpetrators of sexual assaults are known to their victim. Among victims aging 18 to 29, 2/3 had a prior relationship with the offender. The Bureau of Justice Statistics reports that 6 in 10 rape or sexual assault victims said that they were assaulted by an intimate partner, relative, friend, or acquaintance. A study of sexual victimization of college women showed that 9 out of 10 victims knew the person who sexually victimized them. One research project found that 34% of women surveyed were victims of sexual coercion by a husband or intimate partner in their lifetime. There's a link more for that study in your workbook. I encourage you to take a look at that. So, what does this reveal? I think it reveals a huge need to biblically educate and empower vulnerable victims who, for a myriad of reasons, have lost their voice. And it is with that goal in mind that compels me to speak to a sensitive and unspoken, under-addressed matter within the movement #MeToo. The whole purpose of this book is to empower and equip those wounded, violated, and offended to experience and walk out the power of forgiveness. Therefore, there is, like I said, an unspoken, under-addressed component to those who fall into the second category. Those who allow themselves to become vulnerable through at-risk life choices, complicated, compromising relationships. Do you deserve, or do they deserve, to be devalued, violated, and victimized? Absolutely not. However, the pink elephant in the room that no one dares to address out of fear of being labeled an unsympathetic woman or man-hater, supporting perps, or just sick and cruel is the most empowering question I think one needs to ask themselves. It's empowering because it's the only question a victim in this situation can answer for the sake of transforming a victim's mindset into a validated, virtuous victor's mindset. That question is this: how did I allow myself to become a valueless, vulnerable victim? No one walks through life looking for this opportunity or title. It is the result of an internal mindset, belief, choice, and action that has been created over time. What we say about ourselves determines the belief we settle in our hearts, which affects the choices we make, thereby manifesting themselves in who we associate with, where we go, and what we do. So when, how, and why are very good questions to start with. The answers to these questions will help you find your voice and transform you into a validated, virtuous victor. I encourage you, as you begin this process of following the 5 steps that we are going to be talking about in this lesson, step 2 will be your breakthrough transformational moment. I'm very excited for you, and I pray you lean into it and stick with it until you have a huge answer to work with. There are precise prayers and directions as to how to proceed in chapters 4 and 5 of your workbook. So I encourage you to follow those as well. Now, let's get to our third and final group of people, the perpetrator or violator, who has also been the victim of sexual violations, or or choose a life pattern, preparing them to become one who is a violator. He or she may even be the product of both, where they were violated and then become the violator, or they just started making very poor choices in life and it led them down a path of perversion and reprobation of mind. So if you think there's no place or hope for you in the power of forgiveness, you are 100% deceived. Without you genuinely processing and applying these 5 biblical principles for extending, seeking, and receiving forgiveness, you have no hope for ever being set freed from the stronghold of sexual sin, reprobation, pervertedness, guilt, shame, and the condemnation on your life. You also bypass the very minimal responsibility you have before God and man to manifest any kind of remorse or repentance you may be feeling. If you're feeling a twinge of remorse, do not put this book down until you are delivered from this sexual stronghold. If you choose to reject this opportunity, you set yourself up for greater propensities to exponentially fall deeper and deeper into reprehensible sin and even perhaps criminal activities. You lay the foundation, or in many instances continue passing on what's already been laid by previous relatives, a curse to your children, your grandchildren, and even your great-grandchildren. And again, there are precise prayers and directions as to how to proceed in chapter 4 and 5 for you to follow as well. As one who has had to enforce and continually live with court orders, consequences, I personally know the fallout that can be devastating and very damaging. Over the past 15 years, our extended family structure has imploded in many ways. The sad news is there are some of my children who will never see their relative or possible other relatives again as a result of the crimes committed against them. That's a very high price to pay when sin is covered in secrets, lies, and little remorse. The great news is my 2 daughters are no longer bound emotionally or spiritually to the wounds and the violations of the one who violated them. They are free from shame, guilt, defilement, and bitterness as a result of applying these principles. And it's a continual process as they continue to mature and grow as women. So now it's your turn. If this resonates with you in the least, tell someone. Tell someone you can trust. someone who will protect you and provide the proper resources and course of action you need to follow. You are not alone. You have a voice. You must use that voice and allow Jesus Christ, his words, and this material to transform the message of that voice that is condemning you right now, saying things that are not true about you. Please reach out to me. I want to pray and come alongside you in every step of the way towards healing, wholeness, and a victorious thinking and living mindset. God bless you as you begin Lesson 3, The Power of Forgiveness.